In this video, I want to review the Fuji X-T1. I've now spent a week shooting with it, and I want to give you some thoughts on this camera. I want to also give you a few thoughts on the Fuji 56mm 1.2 lens, and talk a little bit about how this camera compares to some of the other current cameras kind of in its class and outside of its class, because we really are blurring the lines now between all of these. But let's dive right in and talk a little bit about this. So this is Fuji's X-T1. It's a 16 megapixel aps-c size sensor mirrorless camera. Now, as I said, we're blurring the lines across a lot of these different cameras. This is a very similar size and shape to the Sony that I reviewed a week or so ago. That has a full frame sensor in it. It's also a very similar size and shape to the Olympus OMD EM10, which is a micro four thirds sensor, smaller than this. One of the things I think is really good news is all of these sensors, despite big differences in size, are performing very well. These smaller sensors, excellent. And you really are not seeing a huge difference, or I'm not seeing a huge difference in quality until you get up into the higher ISOs. You do see that difference in your depth of field when shooting with different lenses, but shoo, throw something like the 56-1.2 on and you are going to get that razor depth of field. For those who don't know, the smaller the sensor size, the harder it is, or the more difficult it is to get a very shallow depth of field. That's why with your point and shoot cameras and your cell phone cameras, you can't get razor thin depth of field unless you fake it with some gimmicky techniques. Full frame sensor, shooting at f2.8, you can get a very thin depth of field. But this isn't a lesson about sensor sizes. Let's talk a little bit more about this camera. So the things that I love about it. Well, it's built really well. It looks cool. And for the most part, it feels good in the hand. Now, a lot of people are really excited about all of the manual controls of this camera. And at first, I'll be honest, I didn't love it. And I still have some beef about all of the dial and this kind of love of the retro look. But what I love is walking up to something that I'm about to photograph. So now I got enough time to think about it. I can look down and here are all of the settings for the camera. ISO, shutter speed, and on the lenses is your aperture ring control. Really sweet. Love that setup. And you got an exposure compensation dial here too if you're shooting in one of the auto modes. One of the things that first threw me about this camera is that there is no kind of shutter priority mode or AV priority mode. You simply move some of the dials in or out of A depending on what you want to control. Now, the downside to this that I've found, here's a con, is that when you're shooting with it up to your eye, it's not really a one-handed affair. You need your other hand to reach up and to fiddle with some of the dials. There are other cameras, for instance, I'm quite happy when I have this on full manual mode, I can do everything I need with one hand. This is the 70D. The same with the 5D Mark III, which I often shoot with. And the Sony, I found, the Sony A7 was very easy to use in one hand. So this isn't quite that. And also because of all of these dials, it's difficult to switch, well, I'm going to call it modes, quickly. Let's say you're shooting in a kind of relaxed setting and then something more action-oriented happens. And on something like the 70D, I might cheat and just throw it over to P mode real quick. Now, one of the other nice things, though, about the feel and the build of this is that the build quality is legitimate. This is well made, this magnesium alloy body. The dials are metal, they feel great, and it's weather sealed. They don't have a ton of weather sealed lenses available yet. More are coming, but it's still nice that the camera offers that. And you can get out there and you can get sprinkled on or be in kind of dustier conditions and not be stressed out about how your camera is. So because this is a mirrorless camera, it's got this electronic viewfinder, or EVF. There's no optical viewfinder in here, and this is one of the other things that if you've researched it all about this camera, you have heard people talk about and probably gush about. In here, it's big, it's beautiful, and it's bright. It's really nice. It's got a lot of great information, and it's got this really slick dual focus mode. I love Well, first let me tell you what I don't love. All of these lenses are focused by wire. So that means when you're rotating the focus dial, it's communicating back to the camera then communicates back to the lens and tells it how to change. So there's no hard stops and there's no real changing that's going on if the camera was off or things like that. And that also doesn't give you full-time manual focus because it just ignores that when you're in autofocus. But you can put it in manual focus, set a button in the back to autofocus, and have this cool dual screen mode. I almost said dual pixel. That's the 70D, something totally different. This dual screen mode where you have your zoomed out view or your normal view, and then to the side of that you've got this zoomed in view that really allows you to see your focus, and you can tweak it if you want. So if the camera has grabbed focus on the front of the flower but you really want to move it to the back, that micro inch, made up a new measurement there, you can do that. And so that's a really nice feature, and just all of the information in here is great. Rotate it to a portrait orientation and it all rotates with you, so it's really nice and you can see all of that. Focusing in this camera is great. In good light or in normal light, it is snappy, it is on target, and in general, let's see, let's put this on this mode dial right here, continuous high. There was a little hesitation there at the beginning as it got focus, and then 8 frames a second, getting focus in between each of those and tracking. I didn't do a ton of fast-moving object photography with this, but I did enough to tell that it is very capable, and I've been impressed with it. When the light levels fall, you run into some issues though. And I happened to be shooting a low-light dance party, and it was really struggling. Now, to be fair, it was really low light, but this is where something like a 70D or a 5D Mark III with that phase detection brain is going to be much more capable, and I actually was shooting side by side with the two, and the 70D was nailing it. Out of 10 shots, 9 would be in focus. I was counting the same with this, and maybe 2 to 3 would be in focus. Again, this was very low light, but 70D was still capable, the Fuji not so much. Now, one of the other things that happens because this is electronic viewfinder in here, it really gets noisy in those lower light situations and it becomes kind of hard to see. It's hard to see looking through the optical viewfinder at those lower light levels as well, but you don't have any noise to deal with as it really kind of boosts the gain and tries to make it brighter, which is helpful, but gets noisy. There's a good lens selection for these Fujis. They have a good number of lenses out already, some really sweet primes. They're not cheap. This guy runs about $900 and some odd, but these are excellent, sharp lenses, very well made. They feel great in the hand. They have a very nice wide angle lens that has come out in the last couple of months, the 10-24. They have some wider primes that would be more versatile for just kind of your general walk around. Again, I shoot prime. That's kind of my thing. I say that often, but if you're going to buy one of these cameras, this kit lens is great. We'll mention more about that in a second, but put a prime on it and you're going to have this really light walk around beast capable of just awesome photography. So keep that in mind. Wireless, built in. I found it to be a little funky. You got to make sure you get the right app out of the App Store, at least on the Android side. There were like 3 of them. I got the wrong one first, got the right one the second. It doesn't always connect when I want to share a picture quite as easily. Again, comparing to the Sony that I recently reviewed, you literally dragged your phone or drug your phone across the NFC sensor and bloop, it shared the file. This guy, you got to push this little function button up here, starts the Wi-Fi, and I always had to make sure I was connected to it and then make sure it was searching for it. And about half the time it would say, something's not happy, try again, and it would often work. For some reason, using it as my phone as a remote, though, worked very consistently. I know I didn't use it as often, but it worked well, and full video features, and it continues to stream your live view during video. That's pretty sweet. 70D can't even touch anything going on during live view or during video with your remote. But that's nice. And there's some other little hiccups, like if you're shooting just RAW, you can't transfer those over. You got to use the in-camera RAW processing to make a JPEG and then pick that file and transfer it over. Whereas something like the Canon is smart enough to say, I'm going to make a JPEG for you to transfer over. So, and you can use it as a remote, I said that. So all very good. Now, I've touched on some negatives. Let's talk about a few more. So Battery life. This is a continual issue in these smaller mirrorless cameras. There's just not room for a big battery, and they're always using these power-hungry screens. So you get about 300 to 400 shots if you're lucky. If you're using these screens a lot, and even the EVF actually draws more power than the back LCD. It's more pixel dense. So you want to watch out for that. They make a grip, $200 and some odd, 2 batteries in it. Going to basically double your battery life, and that brings you up into the range of about the 70D, but then size and weight, you're getting closer to the 70D. So if you're buying that for that fact, you might want to think about it. So as I mentioned, working with these controls, there's no quick way to switch in and out of modes. It's usually a multi-dial setup, but that's minor. Some of these are very minor. I mentioned the EVF in lower light, autofocus in low light. There's no in-body stabilization. So one of the cameras a lot of people are comparing this to is the Olympus, and it's got your 5-axis in-body image stabilization. That's nice. Some of the lenses it's coming with, like this kit lens, does have image stabilization. It's quite nice, but it's not built into the body. Now, since I mentioned the kit lens, let me say a little bit more. Kit lenses, I think, have a bad rap. I think Canon is leaving that behind with these very good STM lenses, and Fuji takes it even a step further. First of all, this is an 18 to 55 lens. It's an f2.8 to f4 lens. That's really nice. So when you're all the way out at 55, f4, you can create some nice shallow depth of field. I found it to be sharp. I found it to be contrasty. It's just a really nice lens. It's good. I like it. I mentioned that all of the lenses have aperture rings on them. Sometimes they have a switch that lets you switch back and forth between automatic, where the camera's choosing, or you get to choose the ring. In the case of the 56, you can just move the dial all the way until you're on the A and it's in the automatic mode. Kind of a minor quibble is you have this gorgeous EVF in here, but this eye cup isn't great and is a little light leaky, meaning when you're looking in it in bright sunlight, light's coming in and kind of bothering your eye. They're just starting to sell a deeper eye cup. I would recommend that you get that because then you can seal out the light. And looking in here it's kind of a magical experience. I don't mean to be that positive about it, but it's really nice when the light is good to review images. Oh, and generally, the lag in here, I have not been a general fan of EVFs. They're a little bit laggy, and I think it's a little disconcerting when there's that pause after you take a picture where what you're seeing is no longer there, but it was what you took the picture of. Really, I like this. This is nice. I could live with this, except when the light is lower levels. I mentioned the Wi-Fi being finicky. The geotagging is also finicky. There's no built-in geotagging. It'll use the app. They're supposed to talk to each other. And again, this may be mostly just my phone, but it did not send information as often as I thought it should. And I looked at some of the pictures, and they are off by as much as a half mile or so. And I was just walking. So imagine if you're trying to drive or cycle and you're taking pictures, bigger gaps off the things like that. Oh, that reminds me, actually, one other con, and I'll write up and put a list of the pros and cons down below, is that the 4-way directional pad at the bottom could be a little better. It's a little on the small side and takes 2 clicks to get into choosing your focus point. And then finally, probably one of the bigger cons for some folks is the video mode in here. It feels fairly limited, and despite turning on the face tracking and multi-point focus, I found that it lost focus on me fairly easily, even when I was just sitting here doing a test demo similar to what we're doing right now. That's a great reason why you should turn autofocus off, but I felt like it should have done a good job. I had the 70D running next to it for comparison. It had locked focus on me and did not lose focus. You've got full 1080 with 60 frames a second. That's good, but you don't have a whole lot more control over what's going on there. You do have a mic input jack, which works quite nicely, and you can throw something on top of the flash. Hot shoe. Speaking of which, it does come with this tiny little flash. Pops up. First thing I found is that it doesn't do a great job of auto flash exposure. I felt that the pictures looked much nicer if you dial it down one full stop. It all depends on how close you are photographing, but this is something else that you got to remember to bring along if you want to use the flash, or you might think you don't want to and then you end up in a situation where you do. So, you know, you're limited in that respect. Did find out that you can slide a Canon flash in here and it seemed to fire it just fine. I didn't play a whole around a lot with ATTL and manual and stuff, but it fires and the exposure's pretty good. So I said I was going to talk a little bit about versus a couple different cameras. So the first thing I've mentioned a couple times is the Canon 70D. Now, all around, very, very nice camera still. Very capable in a lot of different situations, fast focus, a lot of good video features. That dual pixel autofocusing for your live view and for your video on the 70D is very good. It's heavy though, but you do have a great lens selection and just kind of this accessory ecosystem in general. It's one of the things where Canon and Nikon really have a lead. You know, image quality, just as good, if not a little bit better. Smart and feature-rich, and of course, much, much smaller. Versus the Sony A7, that full-frame camera. Lovely depth of field you're going to get out of that with nice lenses. The Sony was slow to focus, slow frames per second, just not really kind of a performance-driven machine. Whereas the Fuji, you're getting there. Well, certainly 8 frames a second with capable focusing is pretty nice. And of course, this electronic viewfinder, the EVF here, really, really nice and nicer than what you had on the Sony. And then versus the Olympus, I haven't spent a whole lot of time with Olympus, so I'm just kind of breeze through this. I mentioned a couple things. Olympus has got in-body image stabilization. None of that here. Olympus is the Micro Four Thirds. It's smaller sensor, but as I mentioned at the beginning, really, until you get up at those higher levels and start to get pixel peepee, really zooming in and looking, you don't see a whole lot of difference between these cameras. They're all capable of producing pretty nice images. The Fuji certainly does a little bit better, especially as the light levels drop. I think that's it. There are some other cameras that it can be compared against, but I haven't spent a whole lot of time with those, so I don't want to make any kind of general wild generalizations. If you've got questions about this camera, you're welcome to leave them down below. I have a few more videos coming, one with a couple of Fuji X-T tips on how to save battery life, how to make the focusing a little bit, even a little bit better. And also just kind of a feature tour, dials, menu system. It's pretty good. All right, so that's my review of the Fuji X-T1. Like I said, if you've got any questions about it, leave a comment down below. If you appreciated this video, the easiest thing you can do to thank me is click the subscribe button. I'd appreciate that. And then also come on over to the Facebook page. There's a link to that right down below too. Post deals, giveaways, tips. Got a really nice group of folks there interacting, and I'd like you to join that community as well. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe.